In October 1962, the entire world was basically holding its breath, just waiting for a nuclear apocalypse in Cuba.
Yeah, the tension was unbelievable.
Right. I mean, the U.S. and the Soviet Union were locked in this massive standoff. The threat of global annihilation was, very real and very immediate.
Hmm.
But while everyone was staring at the Caribbean, 2,500 kilometers of the freezing Himalayas suddenly just erupted in this perfectly timed massive military invasion.
It's such a wild contrast.
It really is. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're taking a pretty fascinating look at the hidden machinery of conflict. We're using the 1962 Sino-Indian War as our chessboard, essentially.
Exactly.
And we're asking a very specific question for this session. How exactly does a nation transform a high-level political objective into, well, actual tangible battlefield success?
Yeah, I mean, that is the ultimate question of military strategy, right? We're looking at the application of operational art today. But I think it's really crucial to state right at the top. For you listening at home, we are looking at this purely as an analytical exercise, to
Mhm.
understand the mechanics of war.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are setting aside the politics, the ethics, any justifications from any party involved. We are simply examining the historical reality of the Chinese strategic approach in 1962 to really dissect the operational art that made it function.
It's basically an audio masterclass in how abstract theories translate into brutal reality.
Oh, exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really get the mechanics of this, we need to set up a framework first.
Yeah.
Think of a nation at war like a massive corporation.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Right. So at the very top, you have your grand strategy. That's the CEO and the board of directors.
Yeah.
They decide why the company exists, what its ultimate political goals are.
Right, the big picture.
Yeah. And down at the very bottom, you have tactics. That's your frontline workforce, the soldiers on the ground deciding what happens day to day, hour to hour in a specific trench or valley.
Right.
But what connects them, that is operational art. It's the crucial middle management deciding how to translate the CEO's grand vision into, well, a physical reality on the ground.
That is an excellent way to visualize it. The strategy decides the why, operational art decides the how, and tactics handle the what.
Right.
And historically, this relationship is often boiled down into a very precise formula. It's political aim plus campaign design plus military capability equals strategic result.
It's a very clean formula, but war is obviously incredibly messy.
Oh, totally.
And what really blew my mind when digging into this history is just how heavily this mid-20th century conflict relied on ancient wisdom.
Right, the Sun Tzu principles.
Exactly. We are talking about teachings written over 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
The framework demands that a commander must know when to fight, prepare before the enemy, use strength correctly, and exploit opportunity.
Yeah, because war isn't just, soldiers meeting on a field. It is a massive, complex national undertaking.
Hmm.
It encompasses diplomacy, the economy, military forces, and the control of information. Military action just cannot exist in a vacuum. It absolutely must serve the broader national objectives.
Right.
So Sun Tzu's principles are really about ensuring every single swing of the sword serves a diplomatic or economic purpose.
But wait, I have to push back a little here. Sun Tzu was writing for ancient armies with, like, sword and chariots.
Sure.
How does a 2,000-year-old proverb about knowing when to fight actually survive the transition to 20th century warfare? I mean,
Yeah.
a modern war room has global communications, massive logistics chains, automatic weapons.
Right. It seems totally disconnected.
Yeah. How does an ancient philosophy practically apply to that?
Well, because the philosophy isn't really about the weapons, it is about the cognitive space of the commanders.
Okay.
We can see exactly what that looks like mechanically by examining the Chinese political calculation in 1962. Going to war wasn't just some spontaneous reaction to border skirmishes. It was a deeply calculated risk. Mao Zedong actually went on record explaining the political math behind it.
I remember reading that quote.
Yeah, he argued that China had fought Chiang Kai-shek, Japan, and America and won. Therefore, they shouldn't fear a conflict with India.
Wow.
And he framed the invasion with this phrase. He said, "Courtesy emphasizes reciprocity."
Courtesy emphasizes reciprocity. I mean, that is a chillingly polite way to frame a massive military offensive.
It really is cold, calculating logic.
Ah.
But strategically, what it tells us is that this war was designed from the very beginning as a strictly limited campaign.
Okay, so it wasn't about total conquest.
Exactly. It was engineered to achieve a highly specific political end state, and military force was merely the surgical tool selected to achieve it.
But, deciding to use that tool is really only step one. Deciding exactly when to make the cut, that is where strategy shifts into operational art.
Absolutely. Timing is everything.
Right. It isn't just about waiting for the monsoon season to end. It's about the international environment, regional conditions, enemy readiness. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, the timing here is incredible.
We mentioned the Cuban Missile Crisis earlier.
Right.
The timing of this Himalayan invasion perfectly coincided with the absolute peak of that crisis.
It is the ultimate example of opportune timing. In October 1962, the world was utterly preoccupied.
Yeah.
And choosing the right time is just as weaponized, just as critical to the operation as the troops and artillery themselves.
I want to understand the mechanics of that distraction, though, because it's really easy to just say, oh, the world was distracted.
Right.
But practically speaking, how does a global distraction actually paralyze an opponent?
Well, it comes down to diplomatic bandwidth and logistical support. India would naturally look to the international community, specifically the United States or the Soviet Union, for political backing.
Sure, or intelligence, or emergency military supplies.
Exactly. But you literally cannot get Washington or Moscow to care about a border dispute in the Himalayas when they're at DEFCON 2, calculating the minutes until nuclear missiles launch from Cuba.
Right. The international diplomatic machinery was entirely gridlocked.
Completely.
So India was completely isolated. And this wasn't just a one-off stroke of luck, was it? China used this exact same operational tactic in October 1950 when they moved into Tibet.
Yeah, the global smokescreen then was the outbreak of the Korean War.
It's crazy how consistent that is.
It really is. They recognized a global distraction and they weaponized it. The strategic lesson for you here is profound. The international environment is a terrain you have to maneuver through, just like a physical mountain range.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. If you attack when the world is looking right at you, you face international sanctions, blockades, foreign intervention.
But if you attack when the world is terrified of something else entirely.
You get a localized, isolated conflict where you hold the overwhelming advantage.
Wow. But, a perfectly timed strike under the cover of a global distraction doesn't really mean much if you don't have a clear target. You have to have an absolute clarity of aim.
And that aim has to be dual-layered. You need a clear political aim and a clear military aim.
Okay, so break that down.
Well, politically, the publicly acknowledged objective in Beijing was to teach a lesson. That was the political desire.
Yeah.
But a general cannot hand a rifle to an infantryman and say, go teach a lesson. That abstract political desire has to be translated into a highly specific military objective.
And what's wild is how wildly those military objectives differed based on the geography of the Himalayas. They divided the conflict into two massive sectors.
Yes, the western and eastern sectors.
Right. In the western sector, the goal was strictly territorial. It was about physically securing what they called the 1960 claim line.
Basically pushing forward to hold a specific line drawn on a map in a high-altitude, barren desert.
Yeah. But over in the eastern sector, down in the deep forested valleys of the Kameng Frontier Division, the objective was entirely different.
What's fascinating here is the distinction between a terrain objective and a force objective.
Exactly. Because in the east, it was not about holding the dirt. The military objective was to entirely annihilate the Indian forces deployed there.
Right. And you have to think about how that changes the operational art.
Yeah, how does it, if I want to take a hill, I just push you off it.
Right. But if your goal is to annihilate the force, pushing you off the hill is actually a failure.
Wait, really?
Why? Because you just retreat, regroup, and fight me again tomorrow. You're still a threat.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah. If your goal is a force objective annihilation, then your operational design cannot be a simple frontal assault. You have to use encirclement. You have to cut off their retreat routes, maneuver behind them, and physically trap them. The operational art is ensuring that the tactical movements on the ground perfectly align with those distinct grand aims.
And while they are planning these complex encirclements, there is this massive information strategy happening simultaneously to control the narrative.
Oh, absolutely.
Because China officially termed this massive offensive as a counterattack in self-defense.
Right. Narrative control is a critical weapon. Before and during the initiation of the war, they used extensive diplomatic methods and internal propaganda.
To convince the world.
Well, partly, but this wasn't just for the international community. It was primarily domestic.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was designed to infuse their own soldiers with a sense of justice and morality, to convince them they were protecting their nation from aggression.
So you're fighting war perception right alongside the physical war. I mean, a soldier fights significantly harder if they believe they are defending their home rather than invading someone else's.
Exactly.
But I want to get down into the dirt now, because we've got the timing, we've got the narrative, we've got the political aims. How does an army practically achieve this across a landscape as massive, freezing, and unforgiving as the Himalayas?
Well, it requires the absolute mastery of surprise, deception, and force concentration. The whole concept at play was hit fast, hit hard.
I'm trying to picture this, though. The Himalayas are essentially vertical battlefields. You can't just roll divisions of tanks across a flat plain.
No, definitely not.
So how does a fast and hard offensive actually function when your soldiers are literally climbing mountains and fighting altitude sickness?
It functions through calculated risk and just overwhelming concentration. The Chinese mounted calibrated large-scale attacks on two fronts that were almost 2,500 kilometers apart.
Which is just an insane distance.
And they did it right before the harsh winter set in, which is traditionally when campaigning stops entirely.
Yeah.
This caught the Indian Army completely off guard.
Right.
To hit hard in the mountains, you don't spread your troops evenly across the border. You use reconnaissance to find a specific valley or pass where the enemy has, say, a single company of men.
Okay.
And you secretly move an entire battalion to that one spot.
Force concentration. So you might have roughly equal armies overall, but at the specific point of contact, you outnumber them 5-1.
Exactly. They unleashed what observers called human wave assaults. This requires a willingness to accept immense military risk, what military theorists call military gambles.
Right.
The operational goal was to hit so hard and so unexpectedly that they effectively sliced the Indian Army into smaller, isolated units that couldn't communicate with each other.
And then just overwhelmed them piece by piece.
Precisely.
Imagine the psychological shock of that. You're stationed in a freezing outpost, assuming the winter weather will prevent any major movement.
Right.
And suddenly, you are hit on multiple fronts, your communication lines are cut, and you are facing overwhelming numbers. It creates utter decision paralysis for the commanders.
And that is the true value of surprise. Surprise isn't just about sneaking up on an opponent. It literally multiplies your combat power.
Because they can't react.
Exactly. The shock paralyzes the enemy's command structure, meaning their troops can't maneuver or reinforce each other. The historical reality is that the debacle for the Indian forces in 1962 was primarily due to a failure of strategic foresight. They lacked the intelligence and the capability to anticipate this level of operational coordination.
Let's talk about that intelligence gap, because the ground tactics heavily utilize Sun Tzu's concept of the indirect approach.
Yes.
Rather than just charging into the teeth of an entrenched enemy fortress, the Chinese commanders use the topography against them.
Right. So the direct approach is frontal pressure, attacking the strongest point. It's bloody. It's inefficient.
Right.
The indirect approach is what we saw in key battles like Namkachu or Selah. You avoid the tough, entrenched fights. You use the mountainous terrain to flank the enemy.
And take the high ground behind their defenses, cutting off their supply lines.
Exactly.
Right. Because if you control the single narrow road leading to a fortress, you don't need to attack the fortress. You just wait for them to starve or force them to attack you uphill to get their road back. You increase the enemy's attacking difficulties.
That's it, exactly. And parallel to this physical maneuvering was a relentless information strategy on the ground. They weaponized concealment.
How so?
Well, they hid their preparations, their supply routes, their time schedules, the distances they were traveling. They even hid the identities of their commanders.
I read they even kept their own frontline soldiers entirely in the dark about their true intentions until the very last moment.
Yes, they did.
Which is brilliant, because if your own troops don't know they are about to launch a massive invasion tomorrow, a captured soldier can't leak the plan.
Exactly. They utilized spies, they spread false rumors to misdirect Indian intelligence, and created a fog of war that really only applied to one side.
Wow.
Strategically, Chinese commanders constantly observed the minute details of the battle to maintain a perfect sense of the enemy's situation while actively denying the enemy any clarity at all.
So information advantage directly creates operational advantage.
Absolutely. If you know exactly where the enemy's weak point is, and they have no idea where you are, You don't need a larger army to win.
It's like a magician's sleight of hand. You force the enemy to look right at a direct frontal pressure, maybe a small skirmish to draw their attention.
Right, the misdirection.
Yeah. While the real threat, the dagger, is an indirect flanking maneuver moving silently through a valley miles away.
But, starting a war, executing the trap, that is really only half of the operational art.
Right. You have to know how to finish it.
Exactly. Knowing how to end it is the ultimate test. Without a predefined exit strategy, a limited campaign very quickly degrades into a sprawling quagmire.
The concept is aim, operation, termination. You start with the end state in mind, you achieve the objective, and you terminate the conflict before the environmental or political conditions change.
And the decision makers in Beijing plan to end the war as quickly as possible. They achieve their territorial goals in the western sector.
Right.
They achieve their forced destruction goals in the eastern sector. But just as importantly, they needed to transfer the focus of their national effort back to domestic economic development. War is incredibly expensive.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the timing of the termination is just as brilliantly calculated as the initiation. We have to go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right, the global distraction. By late November 1962, the United States and the Soviet Union had actually reached an agreement.
The missiles were being dismantled. The threat of World War III was easing.
Exactly. Which means the international bandwidth was freeing up.
The world was about to turn its eyes toward the Himalayas.
Yes. The window of global distraction was rapidly closing. The political objective was met, the military objectives were secured, and the international smokescreen was blowing away. So they just stopped.
Just like that.
Yeah. They didn't let the momentum of victory carry them past their political goals. They unilaterally declared a ceasefire and pulled back.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a massive amount of ground today, from high-level CEO strategy down to the brutal mechanics of mountain encirclements.
We really have.
For you listening, let's do a quick, rapid-fire mental concept map. Let's build an answer framework you can use to truly understand successful versus poor operational art.
Okay, let's start with the core equation we established. Political aim plus campaign design plus military capability equals strategic result.
Right.
When we look at successful operational art as demonstrated by the Chinese strategy in 1962, we see very clear pillars holding that equation up.
Right. Pillar 1, clear aims. They knew exactly why they were fighting politically, and they translated that into highly specific military targets, whether taking a line on a map or destroying a specific division.
Yes. And pillar 2, preparation and logistics. You cannot move armies through the Himalayas in winter without meticulous, obsessive logistical planning.
For sure. Pillar 3 is surprise, using a global crisis to mask your intentions and striking before the enemy believes the weather will even allow it.
Right. And pillar 4 is concentration, avoiding the equal distribution of forces and instead creating overwhelming superiority at the decisive point of attack.
And if we look at the inverse, the poor operational art that led to the systemic shock of the Indian forces at the time, we see exactly what happens when those pillars fail.
Exactly.
When you lack clear strategic foresight and intelligence, you end up reacting instead of initiating. Your forces get dispersed trying to defend everything, which means they are strong nowhere. And the result is decision paralysis.
So if you were going to explain this concept to a colleague tomorrow, build it sequentially. Start with the core concept. Operational art is the bridge connecting the why of grand strategy to the what of tactical combat.
Then use the 1962 conflict to show how ancient principles like Sun Tzu's mandate to exploit opportunity were practically applied by using the Cuban Missile Crisis as a diplomatic shield.
Right?
You visualize how surprise and deception literally multiply combat power on the ground.
And most importantly, emphasize that an operation must have an exit strategy. Military operations and political objectives have to perfectly align from the very first shot to the declaration of the ceasefire, or the entire endeavor just collapses.
It is a highly synchronized, ruthless mechanism. Operational art isn't just about drawing arrows on a map. It is the absolute mastery of timing, the manipulation of perception, the exploitation of the environment, and crucially knowing exactly when to stop.
You know, this raises an important question, something for you to think about long after we finish today.
Oh, I like these.
We've analyzed how historical operational art relied so heavily on physical deception, hiding troops in mountain passes, cutting telegraph wires, perfectly timing attacks to coincide with global news distractions.
All right.
But how do these exact same principles apply today? We're living in an era where the battlefield is entirely digital, satellite surveillance is constant, and information warfare happens in real time right there on the smartphone in your pocket.
Yeah.
How do you achieve operational surprise when the whole world is always watching?
That is a staggering thought. The technology evolves, but the underlying art of strategy remains exactly the same. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden machinery of war. Keep diving deep, stay curious, and we will catch you next time.